Welcome back to the Never Iron Anything Comics Review podcast. This week we head off in yet another direction in this beautiful hobby of ours. Here to help steer is comics fan, podcaster, comics editor. He's also top in English. It's the book club's own Eamonn Clark. How you doing, man?
Hello, clouds. Hello, sky. And indeed, hello to my great friend, Tony Esmond.
Mate. Yeah, good. This has been a fucking joyous couple of weeks. I don't think we've ever shared so much on the WhatsApp about an upcoming episode than this. I think I'm going to say. Do you think so?
It's great when we find one that sets us off on these little research rabbit holes and watching documentaries and reading books and looking into a subject that perhaps we didn't know a lot about to start with, and we know a little bit more about now. It's been fascinating.
I see it as that divide between us in reading and enjoying things, which we both have in this case, which I'll tell you about in a second, but then looking behind the curtain as well, which is what we tend to do here, don't we? You know, which I like.
Yeah, absolutely.
In general terms, how you been, man? You did share with me the proof. You've got a proof now, haven't you? Is that okay to say?
I have a physical proof in my hand of DUI 3, the anthology comic from the ACP and the Drink and Draw community. And so it's been a bit, there's been delays on this project, but it will be hopefully up on the shop and shipping the first week of October.
I think that's marvellous, man. I don't see any problem.
All the proceeds.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good. Yeah. And all the proceeds go to M.I.N.D this time, the mental health charity.
Great stuff, mate. Love M.I.N.D. Really good people.
Yeah.
I've got a M.I.N.D calendar in my office. Yeah, nice people.
Very good.
Good stuff. So very excited about that. You've just done a Conrad episode, haven't you, where you've been to the movies? No, I haven't seen one of them, so I haven't listened to it all.
Right.
Yeah, but you saw Blue Beetle and The Flash, is that right?
We saw Blue Beetle and The Flash, and we did that on Mega City Book Club, or the Mega City Film Club episodes, as we call them at Conrad. But I'll tell you, the interesting thing about that is that we're now getting all these listener suggestions of films that have got a sort of connection to 2000 AD and British comics.
Oh, okay.
So I'm actually looking forward to those even more, to doing some of those coming up.
Going back to some older films, maybe? Or...
Older films, yeah. So we had Alex Frith on, who chose Hell Drivers, which is the Stanley Bacon movie that might have done Bill Savage.
Yeah.
And we also did Damnation Alley. And I'll just hint that we may be talking about a certain robot police officer shortly. As well.
Okay. I know someone would be very jealous if they're not on it with you.
Oh, right. One of your co-hosts.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but he'll definitely be listening, as will I be. Yeah. That's good stuff, man. What about sort of comic-wise? What have you got coming up?
That's a good question. What coming up on the Mega City Book Club?
Yeah.
Well, out tomorrow we've got an episode about Action, the Pat Mills comic from the 1970s that caused all the trouble.
There's a tie-in to that in what we're going to be talking about in a minute as well, isn't there? Yeah,
there is. Yes. And then 2 weeks tomorrow, I've got an episode with yourself, Tony Esmond, talking about the Light and Darkness War from Tom Veitch and talking about some Cam Kennedy.
We went full hippie on that, didn't we? We became hippies for the day. Yeah, that was great stuff, man. Marvellous. Yeah. So
that'll be out in 2 weeks on the Mega City Book Club. Action comic tomorrow, Light and Darkness War. We've got some Tammy coming up.
Oh, nice.
One of Pat Mills has got Requiem Vampire Night coming up as well.
Nice. Yeah. The art on that, man, blows me away.
It's astonishing,
Yeah. And sells so well in France. You wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know. Out there. Yeah, it's great.
The Pat Mills Pension Fund.
Exactly. Yeah. Some. Definitely. Yeah, he might be spending it on some red wine with me in the new year.
Jolly good.
Yeah, good. Good. So now you've suggested this. I suppose a couple of months ago. We've been raiding garages and eBay to look at stuff for this, haven't we?
We have.
And there's a little link into our buddy Simon Russell, who refers to this chap as his god. He says he's so good. He loves him, and I can see why. So who have you chosen for us to talk about?
So today, Tony, we are going to be talking about one of the giants of British cartooning, let's say, rather than comic books. We're going to be talking about Ronald Searle, and we're going to use as our jumping off point, we're going to use the book Downwich School, the Nigel Molesworth book from 1953, written by Geoffrey Willans, but obviously illustrated by Searle himself.
Yeah. And I've named this the Zoom call we're on with Down with Podcasts, and purposely spelt it wrong as well, which did amuse me for about 5 minutes this morning. Good. He is a man who just does. I mean, saying he's fascinating doesn't do this geezer justice, does it? It really doesn't. And very, perhaps a little bit more. We'll get into it, but a little bit more multifaceted than you might imagine if you've just been exposed to maybe St. Trinian's or Down with School or something like that. And again, and I know it's something we've talked about before, Eamonn, he is the creator who, like many, is better known in France and Germany than he is here in a way, you know?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a Pat Mills parallel.
Yeah.
Because, and it also, to me, it sort of ties back to an earlier podcast we did, because like Robert Crumb, Ronald Searle, at some point in his career, sort of self-exiled himself to France and spent the rest of his life living in and working in France, where he was, it seems, sad to say this, but he was much more appreciated as an artist than he was here, perhaps, in the British Isles, sadly.
Yeah. I mean, why isn't he a knight? He should be a knight or something.
He should have been.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable to me that he isn't. When you look at some of the bloody doofuses who are, maybe didn't donate enough. Who knows?
And as you say, multifaceted. Because if you look at some of the books about his artwork, he could, as apart from those scratchy, inky drawings of terrible school children in the 50s, but he could do it all. It seems, some of the images that you and I have been swapping on WhatsApp. Just gorgeous stuff,
amazing.
But in all forms, in all media, he's just wonderful.
Yeah. So let's quote. So we've been off down rabbit holes around this one. As Simon actually did as well. We'll probably chat about that later. But I put something up that a mention of the fact that we were doing this podcast today on the site, and Pat said, "I'm a huge fan of Ronald Searle. As a kid, he was an icon of rebellion, not just the Rake's Progress, St. Trinian's, but Down with School, with immortal scenes of the sinister Gabbitas and Thring capturing a young man and turning him into a teacher." So there's that sense of childhood rebellion that Pat got through comics and illustration and books. Now that may travel over to action and 2018 in a way, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see some of this, and in fact, last time you and I were talking about Dave Gibbons and Pat Mills working together on Doctor Who comics, and I opened up Dave Gibbons' Confabulations, and there is, I believe it's M for Molesworth comes just before, M for Alan Moore. So Dave Gibbons had the same inspiration from the Nigel Molesworth books that Pat Mills wrote to you about.
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, what was your first exposure to it?
So I reckon, we were talking beforehand, they were put out in paperbacks. The Nigel Molesworth books were put out in paperbacks in the 1970s with very recognisable covers, and we all had them. I think everybody who went to school at that time in the 70s or 80s had to have copies of them. For anyone who doesn't know, Nigel Molesworth is the terror of St. Custard's. St. Custard's is
the best name for a school as well, isn't it?
St. Custard's, a seventh-rate boarding school in the 1950s. He is the gorilla of 3B, Nigel Molesworth, who writes these books about school life with his terrible spelling, which is a feature of them, and his, this wonderful, humorous look at a very strange part of British life, the public school, the boarding school, in this case, a very sort of like run down at heel one. And the interactions, or the sort of like combative nature between him and his classmates and the teachers in particular, the teachers who he loathes, with a passion. And they're just hilarious. They're hilarious books, and they are all illustrated in black and white ink by Ronald Searle. And again, I know I keep doing this, but I keep tying it back to earlier podcasts we do. When we talked about Calvin and Hobbes and Bill Waterson, and how Bill Waterson just drew funny. When he drew something, it was funny to look at. And Ronald Searle, of course, a master at that. His illustrations are just hilarious.
Yeah.
I know there's people that go on about the picture of the school dog in Downward School as being like one of the classics of comic illustration. I read them in the 70s, I think, in those paperbacks.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be around the same time as well. I remember there was always one on the shelf at my family house, you know.
Right.
And it's a weird one because I think my father bought them. My father sort of liked it. I mean, they were slightly frowned upon because they were spelt purposely so badly, you know.
Yeah.
But I remember I went off to boarding school late 70s, early 80s, and I knew about boarding school for two reasons. If the movie If, which was just a frightening horror story of a boarding school, and these books. And when I went off to boarding school, you realise how much Willens and Searle had got right about it. So I was leafing through the Complete Molesworth this morning and texting you mostly over a coffee. And there's these pages that are caricatures of masters at school. And, you know, there's the one who likes to be liked, the one who just, you know, this one who wants to go off and work for the Foreign Service, you know, even in the 80s, he got it spot on in relation to those masters from school. Yeah, it really was something I sort of shared with my dad, and I hate to say it, but there was almost this sort of romanticism, as we had in a lot of our fiction back then, romanticism with boarding school, didn't we? In boys and girls books, I think. It was the sort of grand adventure. Someone would always be a detective or something, wouldn't they? You know.
There were the boarding school stories, both in comic books and in, you know, books, was a big theme, wasn't it? You know, boarding school adventures, and as you say, the detective story or the adventures. Jennings, I remember those Jennings novels. Of course, there was Mallory Towers for, you know. Yeah,
which is we've got an interview with someone who refers to that as his main influence to making comics on the ACP on Monday. So listen to that one. Bizarrely, just strangely out of the blue, Mallory Towers has been mentioned coincidentally twice in the last two interviews we've done. It's amazing. But yeah, I mean, and there's, something. I mean, you and I chat humorously occasionally about Will Hay, but we had stuff like what's the Will Hay teacher one? I can't remember now. It's not. Is it? There's one where he's a school teacher, which would fit immediately into this. Charles Hawtrey plays one of the kids who looks like a character from these books, you know. But also at the time you had stuff like the Ealing comedies, and a lot of that just pre-war, post-war stuff going on that would have fitted exactly into this. It's only a shame that Willens died quite early, didn't he? That we didn't get any more, because I think we got 3 while he was alive and 1 after he died, I think, didn't we?
Yeah, he was. He died in 1958. He was only 47.
Yeah,
and he'd had, you know, because we talk about Willens briefly. He'd had a on-off career as a teacher at schools, which is probably where he got a lot of this from.
Yeah,
he wrote comic novels. He was in the Navy during World War II. But yeah, he had 5 years or so of success with the Molesworth books, and then he passed away of a heart attack at 47.
Yeah,
like blokes used to do.
Yeah, there was all that smoking and drinking, lighting bits and stuff back then, wasn't it? Yeah. Let that be a warning to everyone. But he was also, interestingly, a school kid at the same school he became a master at.
Right.
Which I think there's definitive parallels. I think his life translated into fiction, I think, on occasions in this book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he served in the Second World War on HMS Peony and HMS Formidable. He also wrote a George Cole movie called The Bridle Path, which you were pointing out earlier leads back into the St. Trinian stuff, which we'll talk about in a minute. And he also wrote a book on Peter Ustinov.
Oh, right, yeah, of course, yeah.
The world of British movies was a real hobby back then. You know, a lot of the picture magazines and the film magazines were about the time. It was a big thing, I think, for publishing and the British economy and the British people and stuff. And there's a great quote I found of him which says, "History started badly and has been getting steadily worse," which is just typical of this dude.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
Now we're going to move on to the life of Searle in a second, but let's just stick with Molesworth for a minute. Nigel Molesworth, the Gorilla of 3B. There's a lot to it. So in these 4 books, we get immaturely spelt prose purposely, which it's like reading a Burgess novel sometimes, isn't it? It takes you a while to get all. It's like reading Train Spotting or something. It takes you a while to get your head around it, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. You need to get familiar with the sort of like the spellings and the language, and it almost helps to just read it out loud in a way.
Yeah, it does,
But yeah, it's one of those novels where you have a slight language to learn when you get in there.
Yeah,
and of course the language of a boarding school of this decidedly down on its luck boarding school.
Yeah, and this was a time of canings and slipperings and just feral children running around. It really was. And then, of course, there's this bizarre thing that I came across this morning, which is this Harry Potter connection. Now, there's a reference in, I think it's Down with School, where Molesworth is writing a fictitious play that's called Hogwarts. Now, that's right. So got me thinking. I'm not a Harry Potter fan. I've not read the books or seen the movies or anything, but I'm aware that Hogwarts is it the name of the school he goes to, isn't it?
Yes, that's the Harry Potter school is Hogwarts.
Yeah. Now, if you read into the term Hogwarts, I think J.K. Rowling has told people she got it from seeing a plant or a flower at Kew Gardens or something. But there's so many when you start thinking about it. There's so many parallels between. Even looks like a fat version of Harry, doesn't he? A little bit.
Yes, he does.
Like a messy version.
Does,
messy version of Harry. It's a weird coincidence, which I'm going to call it that because I don't want anyone to sue us. But there's a weird coincidence there somewhere, I suspect. It's a strange one.
Well, I mean, what can we say politely is that we know that J.K. Rowling's read a lot of stuff. She took influences from a lot of stuff, we all do. So,
of course.
She may have read the Molesworth books at some point, possibly, and maybe a word stuck with her. And certainly some of the images of the schoolboys with their bags and getting on, back to class and getting ready to be sort of shipped off back to school.
Yeah.
Sort of remind you of some of the opening scenes of the Harry Potter movies. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. And from what I've seen in the clips that I've seen, all the teachers are these sort of strange caricaturist characters as well. Similar to the way the Molesworth characters are. Yeah. I have to say,
all wear gowns like, school teachers used to do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true actually. Yeah. I have to say there's one page if you've got the complete Molesworth, I think it's page 110. There's a moment where they're all the people are coming back from what we used to call exeat, which was every third weekend you'd get a weekend at home if your parents were in the country, and all the kids would disappear off, and us who didn't get home for exeat because our parents were in the forces or anything, were stuck at school with like the 8 kids and one brother to look after us. But when everyone sort of poured back into school after exeat, that was what it looked like, carrying trunks, different shaped parents, in different shaped cars, kissing their kids or not kissing their kids, or this sort of thing. It really brought it back for me. It really did. Yeah, so well done.
It's one of those illustrations where you look at it and you just keep seeing bits going on, that Searle has put in the background, more details, and all in his wonderful, black, inky style.
Yeah, so good. We're going to get onto a little quote that you and I both wrote down about our favourite quote about his line art. Now, let's talk a little bit about Ronald William Fordham Searle, born in Cambridge, 1920, died in 2011, aged 91. They survived, these cartoonists. It's lovely to see some of them. You look at the mad guys. Some of them made it almost to 100. Left-handed, interestingly, which became lucky for him later on when someone decided to crush his other hand. Not born from an artistic family or anything, born to reasonably humble beginnings in Cambridge, and he was described as a townie. There's a great documentary by Martin Rowson, which you can find. I think it's done for the BBC. You can find it on YouTube.
BBC4 documentary,
Yeah, and Rowson's great. I know he's a big fan. I met Rowson at a convention in America once, and he brought with him a Ronald Searle ink pen that we all held and had pictures with. I've sent you a picture of an eye of.
You sent me a picture,
just brilliant. Yeah, he loved him. So he was a massive art fan and did have stuff published before the war, very briefly. He was the only non-student to get published at the time in the Cambridge University. It was like a magazine, I guess, or something like that.
Granta, the magazine.
That's it. Yeah. And after an issue, he signed up for the Royal Engineers and went fighting in Malaya. But he'd actually submitted to the magazine Lilliput, which was an establishment magazine. You know, it'd been about for decades. And the story goes. Now, I'm not sure about this story. I mean, I'm not sure whether it's true, but it certainly sounds lovely. Whereas as he stepped foot into a battle, I think it was in Singapore, he looked at his feet, and there was an open copy of Lilliput showing him that he'd finally made it, and there was one of his cartoons in there. It sounds a little bit too ideal to be true, but yeah.
I mean, I've read a couple of versions of it that he probably first knew that his cartoon, the first reference to St. Trinian's, had been published in this magazine Lilliput. He probably found out when he was in Singapore, and whether it was like, as you say, just on the floor when he was sort of being sent into action, or whether he saw it on a newsstand or everything, slightly different versions. But he found out basically when he was in military service that he'd actually been published.
Yeah, which is marvellous, which is great. And I ordered some, we'll talk about Lilliput in a bit, but I managed to get 4 copies of a Lilliput from eBay for a tenner with free shipping, and just took a punt on them, 1 from the 1940s and 3 from the 1950s. And I thought he was only in 3 of them, but I looked this morning and I found a couple of illustrations. He's in all of them.
Oh, great! Good.
He's even in the back of one of them in a really lovely coloured advert for "Have a good rum for your money, lemon heart rum," and he's drawn a picture of a cat drinking rum, which is just marvellous. Yeah. Now I'm going to say that his tragic, heroic story of the war is one of the things that prompted you to suggest we talk about it. Is that right?
I wanted to just talk about how hilarious I found Nigel Molesworth and the illustrations. And I would say it was actually that looking into his history was when I found out about his wartime experiences. And it made everything just more fascinating, also deeply disturbing, very, very, very upsetting stuff that we're about to get into. A strange parallel to when we talked about
Shigeru
Mizuki's,
who was probably on the other side of some of these battles, I'm guessing.
Exactly, on the other side, onwards to our noble deaths. Because we're going to be talking about, as you say, the sort of Pacific War, as it were, and in particular the prisoner of war experience of British soldiers.
Did you want to mention what happened to him, man? And did you want to say what, just briefly an overview of what actually happened to him in the war then?
Well, as I understand it, he was sort of posted to Singapore and was not there all that long before the surrender at Singapore, that Britain surrendered to the Japanese. And of course, all the British forces there were then prisoners of war. Yeah. And he was in at least a couple of prisons, but he was sent specifically on a terrible death journey to work on the infamous Burma Railway, the bridge on the River Kwai stuff. He was sent to that sort of experience. He worked on the Death Railway, as it was known. He had the most awful, horrendous time.
God, it haunts you, doesn't it? Just hearing about it haunts you, man,
I know, it's awful. The death and the disease and the suffering of British soldiers. The fact that he wrote about how he would wake up in the morning and his friends on either side of him, in the bunks on either side of him, would be dead. Yeah,
I was about to say exactly that, man. That's the one that got me. I think that really got me. That choked me up listening to him talk about that. Incredible. Yeah.
And then, utterly remarkably, he still managed somehow with, I don't know, pencils, scraps of paper. He still managed to draw. There's this fascinating note that all the British troops were required to sign an agreement that said they would not attempt to escape. So the Japanese got everybody to sign these slips of paper. And somehow or other, somebody managed, who obviously had access to the office, stole a whole bunch of these slips. So Ronald Searle's actual signature on this, non-escape agreement still survives. And of course, he drew on it. He drew 2 Japanese soldiers on it because it was a piece of paper. And paper was such a scant resource. Nobody had any paper. Then he He was hiding his drawings under bunks and everything. If he'd been discovered, it would have been, even worse for him.
Yeah.
It's just,
there's a haunting picture of him, isn't there? He draws himself.
Yes.
Still recognisable, very thin and gaunt, and but with glasses and stubble. And I saw an interview with someone. I think it might have been the Channel 4 one which coincided with the exhibition at the Cartoon Museum. That someone said to him, why is the bit at the bottom and torn off? And he says, "Oh, I smoked that bit." Yeah, the reality. I mean, he was 40 kilos at one point. I mean, I've had dogs that weigh more than that, and he caught malaria, he caught all kinds of things. And there's in that Rowson documentary, there's a couple of people who he was in this prisoner war camp with, and they said he looked like he died. We thought a couple of times he died, and we laid him outside in the sun in the hope that the sun would help to dry him out and make him feel better. And and he did survive, but not, I'm going to say only just, man. Yeah.
I think it was pretty close towards the end. He was extremely ill, and yet at the same time he still had this just urge to keep drawing.
Yeah.
And some of the illustrations that have survived, that are in the books that you and I have been sharing, the body draped over the barbed wire is just, it's terrible. It's just, it's haunting to see this stuff. And as you say, depicting himself and his fellow prisoners as gaunt, emaciated, disease-ridden. It's, it was astonishing to me reading these sections of the books.
Yeah, and he's not a knight.
No.
Yeah, he's never, who I think Martin Rowson, it says widely accepted as Britain's finest cartoonist. Never had anything like, maybe didn't want them, but you know what I mean. But he has had, like you say, he's had honours in France. But the thing is, he said, I went into war as a student and I came out an artist. So amongst all that, he was learning to observe and to draw, I suppose is the way to put it. I don't want to say he was learning his art, but he was learning to observe and to draw at that point, I suppose,
Yeah. Absolutely. And was it during this time that they threatened to destroy his right hand, or tried?
Yeah, I think didn't they? He did. Yeah, that's right. I think he may have even had it slightly crushed or something. I believe I read in one account. But of course, he was fine because he drew with his left hand, and he's lucky, he says, because the art school he went to was, for the times, reasonably progressive, and the fact that they didn't, because often they would bind your left hand if you drew with it and make you learn with your right hand. Some of these schools, even handwriting, I think, was the same at some boarding schools. But he was lucky in that they hadn't, and he continued to the day he died to draw with his left hand, which is great. So like you say, he was working on the railway, and I think the story goes that every piece of wood in that railway represents the life of a British soldier, which is quite horrible. And then he was at Changi prison as well, and when at the end of the war, he never made it back to fight in the war, but at the end of the war he was liberated and eventually made it home. And there's this wonderful account about him in the Rowson documentary about him almost having to relearn his life. When he came back, he travelled, and I think this could be put down to the fact that the reason he did travel a lot in his life was the fact that he was confined for so long. But he came out and did this. We've got all this marvellous reportage that he does around the world. If that was it, if that was all we were going to talk about, that would be the most important thing you and I have probably talked about this year. But it's not, though, is it? He continues on. He becomes greater even than that, I think.
If we had his wartime drawings and then we had St. Trinian's and Molesworth and he'd stopped, it would still be astonishing. But actually, what he went on to after the school stuff, that he himself, never thought of it as his best work. The stuff he went on to, and as you say, his urge to travel around the world, to report around the world, to bring back drawings and bits of artwork that he did of what he saw around the world. His devotion to the refugee problem after World War II, which became a project that he did, I know, with Punch, and it was then published as a book, where... Because again, we read about this stuff. 40 million people in Europe were displaced after the war. And still, like 15 years after World War II, Europe was still dealing with this refugee crisis.
Yeah.
And Searle reported on it and came back with these wonderful drawings, in which the characters that he draws, I'm looking at one page now in the book, where I know we're going to talk about his thick inking of figures, but in these figures are almost like ghosts haunting the scenery.
Yeah.
And you can see the lines of the dormitory behind them. Yeah. It's absolutely amazing.
Everything he does, every person he draws is an individual from the others, which I think I admire as well. There's a personality to every single person, which, is very important when doing that sort of reportage reporting, I think, I think it's probably worth now, because we didn't give it a shout at the time, but you very kindly sent me Ronald Searle Graphic Master, which is the book, I believe, that was produced in 2010 for the Cartoon Museum exhibition. Designed and typeset by Simon Russell, because I posted it on our Slack saying, "Oh, thanks, Eamonn, for sending me this book. It's marvellous." And Simon said, "Oh, I helped in that," and he did. It's brilliant. Yeah, it's probably my favourite piece of art from Searle is in that book, which we might talk to in a bit. But let's just
so that was the 2010 Cartoon Museum exhibition or retrospective of Searle. There's a book, catalogue book. Is it Steve Bell? There's the introduction for it, I think.
Yes, it is. Yeah. There's and in the back, there's a lot of there's a number of artists who've taken homage. So Ralph Steadman, Roger Lord. There's Mike Leave, and there's a lot at the back actually. I have to say, Bell is surprisingly normal when you see him talk. I don't know why I thought he was going to be this crazy person, because I do like his cartooning, but surprisingly normal, which is nice. So let's. Go on, mate. Sorry.
And then Simon Russell, on the Slack of the ACP of this parish, great friend, if we quote Nigel Molesworth, he basically produced that book, or did an awful lot of the graphic design for that book. And it's wonderful. And I picked it up on eBay and passed it on to you. So,
man, it's great.
Well done, Simon.
Real quality book as well. He's got that sort of heavy paper on it and everything. Yeah, it's lovely. Cool. Yeah, my favourite piece of art in that is just like... I was educating some American friends on an American Slack about it the other day on the EOC Slack, going, look at this. So let's talk a little bit about Lilliput magazine, because it's important in his formation, really, because he sent cartoons to them before he went to war, and he was a staple of that magazine for many years. And also, weirdly, he married into it, because Kay Webb, who was the art editor over at Lilliput magazine, he ended up marrying her. She was his first wife. It was founded in 1937. He published his first St. Trinian's cartoon in 1941 with them. British Monthly, short stories, celebrities, articles, quite a few gag cartoons, quite a few subtle nudity. there's a lot of, each issue seems to have something like where to go sunbathing, or this is what women look like, who the statues of them are, and stuff. It's just the Marilyn Monroe nudes are in an issue I own and stuff like that. So it's, as I said, available very cheaply. I bought 4 issues off eBay for only a tenner. Contributors include some great people. Nancy Nutford, who was a novelist for Love in a Cold Climate. H.E. Bates, best known for Darling Buds of May. Believe it or not, Alistair Crowley.
Oh my God!
It's in it. Yeah, Write What You Want, which should be the least of 800 words or less. C.S. Forrester, who did. I'm a big fan of the Hornblower novels. Another thing that I shared with my father growing up was the Midshipman, Hornblower, and onwards. Max, who was a parodist, aka Henry Maximilian Beerbohm. The covers. There's an issue with looking back from our modern times on some of the humour used, and I think I posted one in a recent article on the site, but I did apologise for posting it. But I think for historical accuracy and an issue we were talking about, it was important for people to see the cover for it. But there's a post-war lack of sensitivity, insensibilities, I suppose, going on, which we encounter similar things throughout comics history, don't we? I mean, we discussed it recently on Tezuka with me and Tom, but there's that going on. It had like I say, it had a reputation for posting some risque photographs, very much kind of in competition with Punch, although there were a lot of these sort of magazines about. Some great short stories. So not all the gags and not all the stuff done by Searle in there is is single page gags. He would illustrate stories as well. There's a couple of nice crime stories in there, which he's illustrated, like ruffians in a pub and bare knuckle boxers and stuff like that. It's quite something to be seen. It ran until 1960, which was then in the grand tradition of British comics. It was hatched, matched, and dispatched into Men Only, believe it or not, which that would have been a surprise to the newsagent, wouldn't it?
Yes, yeah.
But I think it was
a different magazine then.
Yeah, it certainly became that way, didn't it? Yeah. Or Hunt Emerson, actually. Me and Simon were talking about this on the Slack on the Drink and Draw the other day. Hunt Emerson regularly appeared in Fiesta magazine. You know, there's that big crossover with British cartoonists and pornographic magazines, if we want to call them that, or they're innocent,
yes.
More innocent times, Simon.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you have any particular, you know, if you were going to pick up a book by him, is there any sort of area that you would go for in particular? I mean, I've just ordered. I'm kicking myself that it hasn't arrived, but he did a book on London in the 50s and early 60s, the streets of London and characters in the street and stuff like that. And I am absolutely jonesing for that to arrive. I can't wait. I think that's where I sort of my love for his work sits, I think. What about you?
Well, I'm very taken with the idea of post-war Britain and post-war Europe and the incredible upheavals that were going on. I'm sort of taken with the idea of tracking down his Refugees book, actually.
Okay.
And looking at that, just because I find that period of time at the moment, I'm quite interested in that.
Yeah.
And looking at the illustrations in this, because I've got the biography by Russell Davies, and looking at the illustrations that he did on some of his European and world tours, I'm quite interested in those at the moment.
Yeah, I get you. There's obviously the Eichmann. So for those that don't know, post-war he became a court cartoonist, as they were. We used to see we see it all the time, didn't we? It always used to be on the news, didn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
You don't see it quite as much now, but he was a court cartoonist for Eichmann's trial, of all people. Adolf Eichmann, which is the infamous trial where he kept saying all I did was follow orders throughout the trial. And that's quite interesting. It's to see him drawing so seriously, but to have that touch of cartooning about it. You know, it's a strange one. And
there's some of his Old Bailey cartoons in here as well.
Oh, right,
that he did, yeah. And I know I spoke to you because my son is a barrister, and he says that just about every barrister he knows has got a copy of the Nigel Molesworth picture of him appearing as a barrister.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely fascinating. Eichmann trial and court cartoonist, as it were.
Yeah. We haven't mentioned St. Trinian's. I think we perhaps should. St. Trinian's became something of a weight round his neck, I think, didn't he? He got a bit sick of it, didn't he? He bombed it or something at one point. Is that right?
Yeah. He killed off the school in a book. What was it called? Souls in Torment in 1953. So he comes back after the war. He gets this successful run of St. Trinian's cartoons in Lilliput.
Yeah.
They get collected in books. They get turned into films.
Yeah, we didn't realise there's been 7 movies made of.
Seven St. Trinian's movies. 2
modern age ones and 5 from way back then. And they had the people in them, didn't they? All the big characters of the time were in those movies.
Yeah, absolutely. All the big British actors. The country for a period of time, went in a rather bonkers post-war state, went a bit St. Trinian's mad. It became a real thing. We'd almost say it was like a flash mob thing, with people turning up dressed as schoolgirls.
It really was, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And committing, like, there was this sort of fake smash and grab committed by some of them. Have you seen that footage?
Yes.
Where they turn up at a shop, smash the windows, nick a load of stuff, and then they all run off with their hockey sticks over their heads and stuff. It's like incredible.
Yeah. And Ronald Searle, I mean, I'm sure you might have included this anecdote as well. He always said that St. Trinian's to him was that, he was a chef, and that once upon a time he made this rather good jam tart.
Yes.
And that people just keep going on about the jam tart all the time and don't talk about all the other stuff he's done. Yeah. And so St. Trinian's actually became a little bit of a weight around his neck, something that he wanted to shed and move on from.
Yeah.
I think we're fortunate that Jeffrey Williams said to him, "I've got this Nigel Molesworth character that I did as a diary in Punch, and we could do a book of that."
Yeah.
And that, that he said yes, because you could see him probably thinking, "Oh, I've had enough with naughty school kids, and I want to do other stuff." But fortunately, he did the Molesworth books, and of course they were also a huge success.
Yeah.
And I guess helped him in a way have the sort of lifestyle that he wanted, to get away from what he'd been through during the war.
Yeah, and I guess we speak, you and I speak about particular comic creators often, and there's very few who have more than that one big iconic character, aren't they? Dave Sims suddenly strings to mind. He had the Cerebus, but has he really ever been successful with anything else? And then probably, he's tried and he hasn't, and that's quite common, I think. But to have these two evergreen, super popular to the modern, common man, it was incredible, really. A lot of the cartoonists you see in these issues of Punch and Lilliput and stuff, and there's a good 10 of them who are brilliant cartoonists. They never hit the big time like he did, but he managed it twice, which is great.
Yeah. And as you say, St. Trinian still lives on to this day, and Nigel Molesworth, people, even people who haven't actually read the books will still sort of know about the character of Nigel Molesworth, and will use expressions like "any fool know" or whatever.
Yeah. Completely. Yeah, Whiz for Atoms. I don't know why, but that just keeps jumping into my head. I think it was on my shelf.
Whiz for Atoms is such a great expression,
Yeah.
Whenever I came back from holiday and went back to work, it always felt like back in the jug again.
Yes. Yeah. And it's phrases I never remembered came from him until you very kindly got us to talk about it, and I remembered. Oh, of course. There's a comic he does about because he mostly did one panel illustrations, but he did do the odd comic here and then. Odd, he did a few, and there's one of Molesworth trying to hit a ball, and he manages to hit, and he hits it up in the air and it lands on his head and all this sort of thing. And I mean, even playing cricket, when I play cricket, just crap like that flashes into my head. Just they're so imprinted on us, aren't they? Sometimes, this stuff it's amazing. But the thing is, like, for those that have seen the modern St. Trinian's movies, they're not like that. There was almost something slightly seedy about those modern, St. Trinian's movies about sexy girls in school uniforms. But the cartoon.
I'm glad you said it first.
Tony. I don't consider them sexy. Yeah, but you do know what I mean.
Well, because as you know, I'm the prude of the Never Iron Anything parish, and I've always been slightly concerned by the British obsession with sexy schoolgirls, and how when you look at the St. Trinian cartoons that Ronald Searle did, they're not sexy schoolgirls.
No.
Then he didn't do that, and then when they make the films and they get
somebody from Girls Aloud or something to do it. It's a bit like that.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, in the modern ones, it's Gemma Arterton and it's Tallulah Riley. And in the original, there's the 1950s, I think she was called a sweater model, Sabrina.
The sweater model. There's a title for the next tribute book, isn't there? Yeah.
Who plays one of the sixth formers, and you think...
And they're all about 30,
Yes. Yeah, true.
Yeah. And they weren't like that. They were these sort of horrible troll-like kids who were just They were the original Sex Pistols to me. They were just little bastards, weren't they? Just anarchists.
They were. They were dumpy little schoolgirls who were up to anarchy. And of course, reading the books about Searle, and you look at some of the illustrations of the girls. There's an illustration, I think, of the girls being forced to pull the big heavy roller across the hockey pitch. And then there's an illustration that Searle did during the war, of prisoners of war being having to do something very similar to sort of level gravel.
Interesting.
On the railway beds, or on where the tracks are going to go. And you see, he's actually bringing some of this stuff out in these tearaway schoolgirls.
Yeah, it's a funny one because when he got rid of them at the book release, he dressed as an undertaker because he says, "Right, that's it, that's done. I've had enough of this.
Yeah.
I'm not having any more of this nonsense. Moving on." Every time he walks down the street, it's like Tom Baker, I suppose, walking down the street and saying, "Everyone say, where's your scarf?" It's a bit like that, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah. He very definitely cast off St. Trinian's in 1953 in his Undertaker's outfit, and even did a cartoon of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's move on a little bit to what we see in his art. So let's go a bit esoteric, a bit academic, and talk a bit about his art. Now, there's so much to talk about here. The best quote comes from Posey Simmons. Have you got it in front of you? Because I know you sent it to me.
So Posey Simmons said that of Ronald Searle's art. Posey Simmons in the I'll do it again. Yeah, Posey Simmons in the BBC4 documentary by Martin Rowson says of Searle's line, it's a line that goes for a walk, and then occasionally he sort of tickles it a bit as well.
Yeah. It's I think I wrote down it's a contained chaos in a way. There's an absurd chaos to his stuff, but you soon realise that he knows exactly what he's doing with it. There's a Hogarth quality to it, I'm going to say, but with a sort of beautifully fresh looseness and energy. Have you ever managed to sort of encapsulate why you like it at all?
I thought Rowson was very interesting in the documentary, talking about the classic smooth line that British artists or British art schools
he replicates it, doesn't he, on a bit of paper for us? Yeah,
he does. Yeah. He does some sort of like illustrations for us, and how Searle says, "No, I'm not doing that. This line is going to vary in thickness.
Yeah,
the ink. I'm going to show the ink. You know, we know, as you say, he drew with pen and ink.
Yeah,
and he said, I'm going to show the ink. It's going to be there, and at some points, it's going to be very thick. Some points, it's going to be splotchy." I'm going to show the process as I'm doing it. And he could draw anything and make it compelling, could make it funny, could make it moving. You pointed out, that he has some just like great big blocks of black ink that represent a character that leap off the page. And then sometimes he's got this straggly line running around things. And
with a vignette quality to it as well. It sometimes just sits in the middle of the page. Sometimes it leaks out the sides,
Yeah. I mean, some of his illustrations that he did in France of sort of street scenes and so on, where you know that the wall with the graffiti on it is continuing beyond the page. You can see that moving off the page.
There's a great YouTube series. I think it's called The Sketchbooks or something like that, and I think he's a Canadian dude, and he goes through different art, and he's got this friend of his over who's I think an Indian artist, and they go through it, and they talk exactly about that. They talk just about the Paris scenes,
right,
and just the foreground characters, the people in the background. The line of the buildings are really interesting to me, because I don't know whether it's just an optical illusion or the way I'm looking at it, but there sort of seems to be a slight lean from some of the buildings. He leans them like he leans his characters in a way to give the buildings a sort of this personality almost. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a sort of uneven, inky, scratchy perfection somewhere in it. It's sort of, I don't know, it's unmistakably him, isn't it, when you look at it? There's a lot of illustrations in like spot illustrations in Lilliput, but it's him immediately. And there's a lot of people who try and be him in Lilliput and don't quite get it, but you can always spot him. Just incredible. Yeah. There's a lot of good quotes from creators about him, not least of all Rowson himself, who obviously idealises the dude. There's Steve Bell said, provided an insight, an education, and an escape, which is great. I think that's a great quote. I love the fact that Matt Groening claims to have been inspired by St. Trinian's, and when Searle heard this, he just sort of sighed with exasperation. Arnie Roth said his characters and settings throb with life. Ralph Steadman said drawing was Searle's weapon of redress after what he experienced in the P.O.W. camp, I'm guessing. Dowson said Dowson explained how he was the only English cartoonist to have a retrospective at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, which has, I think, just been. We're about to get the second, aren't we? I think you were talking about that.
We believe, we just seen an announcement from John Freeman, our friend John Freeman, that Posey Simmons. There's going to be a Posey Simmons retrospective again in Paris, curated by Paul Crevette, and we think it's going to be the second time it's been a British artist, and the first one was Ronald Searle, and it sort of seems incredibly appropriate because Posey Simmons is in that documentary we both watched, which I think we both highly recommend.
Posey's great, I don't think she gets enough love in comics. I know she gets the love by The Guardian and this sort of thing, but I don't think she gets enough love by the comics crowd, certainly not in the US,
Well, why is her major retrospective in Paris and not in the UK?
I know. Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? Yeah.
And of course, here we get to 1960s, and he moves to Paris and he moves to France. Searle does, and he is much appreciated there. And of course,
sorry to interrupt you. Just on that fact, there, I had a moment with you around that one. I think what happened is you and I have been reading about Searle for a good few weeks now, and I began to hero worship him. I think this is my psychology ran on this, and then I found out that he left his wife and 2 kids and moved to Paris to be an artist, and I referred to it as my Peter Sellers moment, where Peter Sellers leaves his wife to go and because he found an actress he liked or something, wasn't it? And I felt a little bit let down by it, and then I had to have a word with myself. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? It's ridiculous. He's a human being, same as everyone else, and it's not the worst thing anyone's done in his life. And he's been through some shit, that dude. So I had to have a word with myself around that. I think, yeah.
It comes out in the books that he was, like most people, he was a complicated person.
Yes.
With many shades to his personality. He did, and when you say he abandoned his wife and 2 kids, he did literally abandon them. He just left a note on the kitchen table, and gone. And went off to Paris and never came back, stayed in France for the rest of his life. And one of the things, because there's various clips of him, various interviews with him, the Channel 4 interview with him and so on, which I think was probably from that 2010.
I think it was, yeah. It was a year before he died, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. Where you see him in his studio, and of course you and I just love seeing artists in their studios and their working environments. And he says this several times in various interviews and books, that his fuel was champagne.
Yeah.
And
there's no two-way he hadn't had a few by the time he got to that interview, which I absolutely admire that was what he was like, Yeah.
And then I read about what he went through in World War II, and I think, you get all the champagne. You have as much champagne as you like.
You do it, man.
You go to France and live in the country, live in Paris and then live in Provence, and you fuel on champagne.
Because he only moved to Provence, didn't he? Because his wife was ill, to be fair. So he wasn't a man without compassion. Don't view him as that. Yeah, that's what happened. And he was with her till the day he died. I understand, man. Only he wasn't... like you say, he was a human being, but there were a couple of other moments, one in particular that humanised these people for me and endear them to me. I think Rowson's... Well, after the documentary, Rowson didn't hear back, did he? He says, "Oh God, I haven't heard back," But oh well, never mind. And then he got a letter, didn't he? A few months later, in Searle's amazing handwriting, and he says thanking him for it, and he says that's the only piece of Searle art I can afford, but it's framed above my desk. And that's brilliant. I love that.
Yeah.
And the other one, the big one for me was. I'm a fan of Gerald Scarfe. I'm guessing you are as well. That's cartooning that. He's famous for his big noses in the I suppose there's more to him than that.
Yeah.
But, and he said he's a bit younger than Searle, and he says he found out where he lived. I think he lived just off Hyde Park somewhere, and every day he would cycle to his house and just about get the courage to knock on the door or ring the doorbell and not manage it and cycle off again. And in later years he became quite friendly with Searle and invited him to his birthday party, and Searle gave him a package, and it was the doorbell. He gave him the doorbell with a note that said, "Always ring my doorbell." And I thought, what a fucking lovely touch that is. How nice is that? That's the best thing ever. We all wish our heroes could be like that,
We do, and we worked out that was the 14-year-old Scarfe, wasn't it? Yeah. 14-year-old trying to pluck up the courage to go and see this great artist that he admired. And again, we've exchanged notes about this. Searle, Scarfe, and Ralph Steadman, those great British pen and ink cartoonists. Just I see parallels between them, the way that they use line and the way they use the ink and the way that they show the process on the page. Scarfe and Stedman perhaps take the exaggeration of characters to even further extremes than Searle did. But what great names,
I know.
What great artists.
The art blows me away. I don't know. I've been racking my brain to try and think who have we got now who does that? Who have we got now who's that sort of fearless on a page? And I can't think of anyone, man. I don't think that instinctual. I'd love to know whether he went down with pencil first. I'm guessing he didn't. Did he? I don't know. So he does. You can find pencil sketches from him, can't you?
Yes, you can. Yeah. But most of the stuff seems to be like, I'm just going to put the pen on the paper.
Yeah.
And let it take it for a walk.
Yeah. And it is slightly different, but I once watched Brendan McCarthy draw. He was sat next to me at Bristol, and he just put this ink pen down and drew somebody, and I was like, wow, that's incredible, we're losing that instinctual bravery on the page, I think, maybe, aren't we, with the whole digital thing going on. Not being afraid, because there's a lot of smudges and smears in his work, isn't there? Purposely not, I guess. But the one art piece that, if I had to choose one, we've always got, like, it's a bit like your podcast. There you go. I'll nick this off you.
Yeah, page.
Yeah, if we had to find one, and one that just like absolutely caught me off guard. There's a book from page 57 in the Graphic Master book. It's called The Obsolete Generation, December 1963. Looks like it's got some pen and ink, but with some light watercolour work on it, of a couple sitting on a bench. I think they're in an underground station, and there's a darkness and a character, and they're the forgotten generation. But at that point, they were probably the generation who fought in World War I and World War II, forgotten, sitting there poor on this bench. And it's so amazing, just brilliant. I put it in, as I say, I put it in the 11 o'clock comic Slack, and someone wrote on it, that'll be me in 5 years. Maybe it's the effect of me just getting old, but yeah, it just blew me away. Is anything in particular that really came for you, man? Or
the big discovery was his work from the war, the stuff that was smuggled out, and some of those which are just simple pencil drawings on scraps of old paper. Are just breathtaking in what they reveal. That's been the big discovery about looking into his life. Yeah. And the strange parallels that we've talked about with other artists that we've considered, and then later on, because he did do colour work as well, and some of his colour pages, his watercolour and ink pages, are just astonishing.
What's that one you sent me today that has the sort of orangey red?
I know, that is just. Yeah, the crucifixion of a thief from Shanghai jail in 1940 something or other. See if I can find the page in this book. I've got the biography in front of me, and I'm just flicking through the pages. But yeah, that's just absolutely astonishing page. It should you look at that and you think, well, he could be. He could be Francis Bacon. He could be that sort of
totally who came to mind with me, man. With that, there's that twisted nastiness to it that you get with Bacon, isn't it? It's just oh wow, and he like you say though, he had this career where he could do full on Ealing comedy, genuinely funny comics, through to these ones we've just mentioned there, the ones that just have this huge emotional gut punch on you and he nails personality every single time. And I was a kid in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s in London, and some of those characters were still about. You'd see people, guys who worked on the roads who'd buy a different suit every week, and some of the London he described. I just wish this London book had arrived because I'm really jonesing for it. But some of the sort of London and the city places he describes there, just spot on, absolutely spot on. Incredibly good. Yeah.
And every portrait he does of a person, as you said, they're just stunning. They're just wonderful work. Absolutely amazing. And what an amazing life.
Yeah, that's a good one, man. Yeah, I think we got overexcited on that one again. I call it the Cold War between you and I. We end up just doing so much research and getting so excited, that the research builds and builds.
you can tell when a subject interests and excites the sort of the hosts on Never Mind Anything, because the research starts to go in. The people, sharing documentaries, sharing books, sharing images, and I knew he was a great artist. I didn't realize until looking into him more quite how astonishingly good he was, quite how varied his work was, and quite what an amazing life he had, and how, as I've said already, he sort of deserved that escape to France and all the champagne, because of what
he deserved a long and happy life, didn't he? I think.
Yes, yeah, and thank goodness he did get it. And we talk, because you and I have talked about war comics. We look back at World War II, and England's got this rather funny creation myth about World War II.
Yeah.
But actually, Tony, the more we look into it, the more just horrendous and awful it seems for everybody.
Yeah.
Just the horror of it all.
I think it's partly we grew up on comics where it was, come on, shoot them out of your tank, these sort of heroic sergeants.
That machine gun nest. Yeah. And then, you read about people's experiences. You read about Mizuki's, experience on the other side of the battle. And then you read about Ronald Searle. No sooner as he arrived at the sort of area of conflict, and he's basically chucked into a jail for 4 years.
Yeah.
Where he almost dies, and people are dying left, right, and centre around him. Absolutely horrendous. And then when he comes back and he studies the displaced people after World War II, who 15 years later are still looking for somewhere to live, it's astonishing.
Yeah, really is. Yeah, beautiful. I mean, there's not a massive amount you can find out at the moment of his. You have to go to eBay, but there's loads of stuff very, very easily available on eBay. If you go to his website, just Google his name, you'll find it. There's not much affordable artwork on there. I think even some of the you've had a look, I get to say, even some of the prints are like 400, 500 quid on there. It's but you can find his, like I say, go and buy some Lilliputs, go and buy some of the paperback works, go and buy some punches if you can find the ones he's in. See if you can find the exhibition catalogue by Simon Russell. Yeah, Ronald Searle, Graphic Master. Yeah, brilliant. I mean that's just a starter pack, isn't it? I think with some amazing stuff that would keep you happy. Absolutely. Definitely. And watch the documentary, which is very good as well. Yeah, Rowson's great on that. Yeah, and he was lovely to speak to about it, showing this pen and talking about how how he had communication with him, because he died I think 6 years before that. When we were chatting to him, and I think he'd got the pens from Searle's wife. But yeah, lovely stuff, man. And Searle had left like a catalogue of his pens with sort of descriptions of what each one did. Yes, that's right. He had a description of the line for each one. He'd written down little notes. This is the spidery line. This one's a good thick line. Yeah. We love all that stuff, don't we? The artist studio and their tools. Yeah, we do. And on the Drink and Draws, we'll often have pen talk, a section we refer to as pen talk, where people talk about the favourite Japanese calligraphy pen they bought recently and all this sort of thing. Yeah, it's just joyous, man. It makes you and I wish we were proper artists, Eamonn. Absolutely, yeah I know. We keep trying. One day, maybe. We keep trying, yeah. Good stuff. Brilliant, mate. Excellent. Like you said at the start there, we've got DUI 3 coming out, which you've edited and written the forward for. Anything else you've got going on in your... So I know you're a busy man. What about Invaders? Have you got much more coming on that one? So British Invaders, the podcast about British science fiction television. We're currently covering the Channel 4 series Humans, which is about... I found that an interesting one. The last season, you're like, wow, they know that's the last season. They fitted a lot in there for me, that one. Yeah. Right. I quite like that, man. I quite like that. And the new Survivors version of Survivors they did. I like that stuff when they. I like that. Yes, I like the remake of that. Coming up on British Invaders, we'll also have we continued our Avengers run through. That's the British Avengers. I'm doing a rewatch of the Avengers at the moment. Oh, great! Well, we get to the new Avengers with. Right. Have you done Nors yet? Is it Nors? Is that the name of it with the giant rat? Oh no, not yet. No. Oh God. Yeah. But New Avengers, of course, is the arrival of Joanna Lumley as Purdy. Yes. And the rhyming slang man, Gareth Hunt. Gareth Hunt, that's right, yes. And for me, of course, that was when the Avengers girl became, like,
real to me, as it were. As
Yeah.
like she's on the telly now. I'm watching her now, and I'm the right age, and I'm thinking, oh yes, this is interesting.
Yeah, I remember one because I'm a tiny bit younger than you, but I remember one where there's a car going through the car wash and they need to preserve like a fingerprint on it or something. So Purdy grabs Steed's hat, jumps on the car and covers it with the hat, and she goes through and comes out as if she's literally just come out of the salon, like she's been blown dry.
Right.
And I remember even as a kid thinking, "Nah, come on," like that. But she was sort of into karate and stuff, wasn't she? It was a co-Canadian production, I'm going to say, or something like that, was it?
There was a French company involved, and I think a Canadian one as well. Yes, that's right, because they wanted to make new Avengers stories, and so
I think I had an annual. I think as a kid.
Right.
Yeah, they did. I remember.
So that's coming up.
Oh, that's good. Quickly then, I was just going to tell you about Norse. So Norse was an absolute money grab for Jaws, and it was about a rat that lived in the sewer. Somebody thought it was a snake because they'd just seen the tail. It was like one of those sort of things, and it was about as good as the rat in the sewers in Talons of Wang Chiang.
Right.
In reality, it was terrible. It really let you down. But I remember being told about it by boys at school and thinking this is the most amazing thing. And then years later, it came out on VHS, and I went, "Oh, okay."
It's not that great.
Yeah, it's not that great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember John Steed. I can't remember who. Patrick Manise met someone in the lift, like an English actor, and this English actor was out there. It might be Michael Caine or someone like that. And he says, "Oh, what are you out here filming?" And Michael Caine, "I'm out here filming la 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 la. This amazing film. What are you doing, Patrick?" He says, "I'm doing the Avengers." And he says, "You're always doing the Avengers, Patrick," like that. And I think it's pretty much that was what it's like, wasn't it? I think he did the Return of the Men for Uncle, didn't he? I think, and that was about it. I think,
And he shows up in one of the Bond movies. One of the.
Of course he does.
Doesn't he?
Yeah, of course he does. That's right.
Yeah.
Good stuff, man. What about any other sort of? I know you've always got a little project on the go. Anything you can mention you've got going at the moment, or?
No, I'll get DUI 3 out and distributed and get it hopefully in everybody's hands soon. I have got another idea on the back burner, which I'm going to start looking at in more seriousness next year.
Oh, cool.
This year's DUI 3 and carrying on with the podcast and occasionally bothering my great friend Eamonn, the terror of 3B. With madcap ideas. We've got some other books that we might get to on this podcast that we sort of
There's one that haunts me. There's one that haunts me that's massissive that I could hold the door open with, and I can see it now. It's sitting opposite me.
Right.
And I was encouraged by it because I saw the creator at SPX, and I wish we'd done it because I could have said, "Oh, we did a podcast." Like a nice introduction while he stares at me weirdly. Which I managed to do with Chaikin.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. Good. Yeah, Chaikin.
He was lovely, man. What
he's a character.
Yeah. I think he's in the UK at the moment.
Talking to him about musical theatre and you'll be...
Well, we did. We talked about theatre and I sort of mentioned the Globe. And we were just off for about 40 minutes talking about Shakespeare and who our favourite actors were and all this sort of thing. Marvellous. Yeah, absolutely marvellous. Yeah, what a dude. Good stuff, man. So where can we find you on what are called the socials and online and stuff?
Head to megacitybookclub.com, find all the episodes there and all the links to British Invaders and everything else, or go to duicomic.bigcartel.com to find out details of DUI 3 and DUI 1 and 2.
Good stuff, man. And I meant to mention, Mr. Ennis really enjoys your chats because we were chatting to him at Baltimore Comic Con as well. You got a big mention. Yeah, good stuff.
Great.
Great episodes.
As our mutual friend Conrad says, Conrad's great friend, Garth Ennis. Yes.
I haven't heard from him for a while. I must message Conrad. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Nice one. Good stuff, man. Good. And we'll speak soon.
Thank you, Tony.